Well, Kodak has been failing because it was in a highly lucrative film business. But as the digital market and digital photography has taken off, the film business has declined. So they moved from a position where they were one of two, and later on in the late 90s, when Fuji started to enter as a big force, three firms, and this was a very high margin business. Digital photography and production of digital cameras is or has become a commodity business. And so the margins are exceptionally low, and they don't have a competitive advantage in that business. Now we can back up to the 1980s. Turns out that Kodak was an innovator. They were the first to do digital photography, even if it was, kind of a big box and was only black and white. But they didn't commercialize it. And that makes a lot of sense. In 1980, there probably wasn't, or in the 1980s, there wasn't probably much to commercialize. However, what they did instead is they focused on the production of film, which is a very specific, highly sensitive chemical process. And that requires that, in order to do that, you have to be a pretty rigid, you need a pretty rigid organizational structure. And so that is not very conducive to change. And also, they had a bunch of chemical engineers on their staff who aren't very useful. Their skills don't transfer very well to digital photography. So they had so when digital photography finally takes off in the 1990s, Kodak tries to transition. And that requires letting go of a lot of their chemical capabilities, and at the same time trying to build up this digital strategy. Problem is even success in the strategy doesn't lead to a profitable business. So it makes you one question, and this was arguably quite predictable ex ante, so it makes one wonder why they tried this in the first place. In some of my work, I argue that there are times when if the competitive and technological environment changes, the best thing for a firm to do might be to not pursue the new opportunity and simply to shut down. So if you're in a very lucrative business, and that business, the demand in that market goes away, and the alternative solution to that problem is being fulfilled by a very highly competitive market, it doesn't make much sense to try to get into that market, because if you do, you're not going to make much money. Your margins are going to be very low. And this is exactly what happened to Kodak. So I would argue that instead of trying to pursue the digital photography market, they would have been much better off simply trying to milk as much as they could out of the tail of the silver oxide or film market, and slowly shut down their operations, which it looks quite likely they may do anyway. I might add that this is they're essentially making the same mistake that Polaroid made. So when digital photography killed Polaroid a long time ago, and Polaroid, instead of trying to spend 2 years and a large amount of resources trying to move into digital photography, and they would have been much better off simply shutting down and not being forced into bankruptcy and simply selling their instant print technology as long as they could, which is essentially what happened to them after they went through bankruptcy. Shutting down is quite tricky for two reasons. One is shareholders tend not to like that. And the second reason is there are a whole bunch of stakeholders. And so if you shut down a company, that puts a lot of people out of a job. Now, at the end of the day, they're going to be out of a job anyway. So what you might be able to do with a concerted strategy is ease that process and provide enough resources to the people who are being displaced to ensure continuity so that you can try to extract profits from the market as long as you can. And then with everything that's left, you simply return that back to the shareholders. So the idea is that you would increase dividends significantly because you're no longer plowing money back into R&D, and then slowly just shut down the firm. Now, I'll be the first to admit this is not an easy thing to do, but perhaps it's better than a disorderly shutdown that might come with a bankruptcy filing.